Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to November's Kingsley Speaker Series. I'm Suzanne Garfield, and I'm delighted to serve as the president of the Kingsley Board. I'm excited today that we have local media, multimedia artist and activist Jessica Wimbley as our featured speaker. And although you may not immediately recognize her name, you will recognize her art. The True Story of Edges, also purchased with funds from the Kingsley, is shown on the wall at the stairwell right of the museum between the first and second floor. So as I always tell kids when I'm touring them, it's one of the few pieces in the museum you can go touch the art, you can touch the wall. So before we hear today's extraordinary speaker, I'd like to share something from the book, Your Brain on Art, How Art Transforms Us, by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. It's really a worthwhile read, and I encourage you to get a copy and take your time to absorb and savor the information provided. And I'd like to read a passage that struck me as important why we strive to come together for the arts. Since the beginning of human existence, the ways in which we have gathered have changed, but the reasons we come together have not. We are ultra-social creatures who biologically evolved to belong to something greater than ourselves. We need one another, and without strong and lasting connections to family, friends, colleagues, and neighbors, without the relationships we create over a lifetime, we cannot survive, we cannot thrive. Supporting this core human imperative to live in community is our unique ability to creatively share our thoughts, ideas, and emotions. The success of our species comes down to this. Art creates culture, culture creates community, and community creates humanity. The arts have the ability to transform you like nothing else. They can help you move from sickness to health, from stress to calm, to sadness to joy, and they enable us to flourish and thrive. The arts promote collective consciousness, allow individuals to process trauma, and spark conversations that lead to social and cultural shifts. The arts offer the highest form of hope. So my friends, this year has been one that has demanded art. We needed art. Art helped us think, helped us heal. We rested and found refuge in art. It touched our soul and quieted our impatience and perhaps some of our anger with the world. On behalf of your Kingsley Board, we are grateful to you for supporting your art community. And as we move into 2026, we wish you and yours a holiday season filled with peace, joy, and art. Always art. And now please welcome Scott Heckes. He's the co-chair of the Speaker Series Committee to introduce today's featured speaker, Jessica Wimbley.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. As Suzanne said, my name is Scott Heckes, and I'm a board member for the Kingsley Art Club. I'm honored today to introduce our speaker, Jessica Wimbley. Jessica is an interdisciplinary artist, activist, curator, and educator. Jessica received her BFA in painting from the Rhode Island School of Design, an MFA in visual arts from UC Davis, and an MA in arts management from Claremont Graduate University. Jessica has been an artist in residence at the College of the Canyons in Santa Clarita, California, the University of La Verne, and the Ripon College in Wisconsin. Her work has been included in dozens of shows throughout the country, and she's received critical reviews from Hyperallergenic, Art and Cake, the LA Weekly, the Huffington Post, and the Los Angeles Times. Jessica has described her interdisciplinary visual arts practice as a combination of biography, myth, and memory, guided by the term biomythography, coined by the poet Audre Lorde to investigate and question identity and history. Please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Jessica Wimbley.
Wow, thank you. every time you have an introduction like that, you kind of wish you could have that person in your pocket and just be your hype person. Can you introduce me to other people? Thank you so much for having me here today. It is such an honor to be here and share my work with you all. Knowing that y'all are the ones who brought the true story of Edges into the museum is huge. Thank you so much. It was a very important purchase for my professional career as an artist. So I'm excited to share with you some of my work and also like what has happened since then. So without further ado, I'm gonna try playing with this new clicker. So here you're starting off with my mom and dad and my family. There's me. As a little girl, still rocking the little fro. And I always have this picture of Princess Leia in Shaft next to my parents, because that's my mom and dad, and this picture always kind of reminded me of Princess Leia and Shaft. And they're always like, why do you clown us in your talks in the public? But I'm like, but Princess Leia and Shaft are like the coolest people ever. They happen to own one of the largest Black-owned advertising agencies back in the 90s. And they did commercials, so I'm gonna see if I can get this to play. No, that did not play. And print ads in magazines. And a lot of their different advertisements were featured in Johnson Publishing, so in places like Ebony and Jet magazine, magazines that were geared towards the African American community. Can y'all hear me better? Right on, okay. And not only did my family produce content for Ebony and Jet, and it was something that we grew up with in my home, when my father passed away, he was also included in it as well. So there's this interesting relationship between producing content for this media, consuming the media, and being reflected in the media as well. While my parents did advertising and they focused on the African American community, where I grew up was actually a predominantly white community. So as a little girl, I was often one of a few or the first to integrate the schools in Barrington, Illinois. And so Ruby Bridges became an important figure to me growing up, thinking about the power of Black girlhood, the strength that she had to show and endure and face as she entered school, and which at times was hostile. And so this is a photo, one of my first photographs that I did in high school, in which I'm centering Black girlhood. And one of the things that I found so interesting about this photo, I took this photo in a trip to Ghana. So this is, I'm in Accra, I'm at a church. This is a film photo, but it reminded me very much of Ruby Bridges. It made me think that this picture could be taken in the 60s or the 50s. There seemed to be an interesting play with time with the image, even though it was an image that was produced in the late 90s. Growing up, not only did I consume kind of advertising and popular culture, there are different books and representations we had in our house, and I loved Africa Adorned. It was a book that I just always looked at. I loved what the different women were wearing, the colors, the different skin tones. And I also was greatly impacted by Black nerdiness. I consider myself a nerd, and Urkel is a great representation of nerdiness back in the mid-late 90s, especially of Black nerds. So, UC Davis. So I started making these equations, kind of putting together different popular cultural representations of Blackness, pulling different figures from different time periods. So Mr. T plus a cotton flower squared, or Gary Coleman divided by the Kool-Aid Man, or Tootie from The Facts of Life times Tootie, or Jim Kelly. So there's definitely, if you know, you know, you have to be a certain age to get some of the references. You have to understand blaxploitation, some 80s sitcoms, all of this. And so I'm playing with some of those elements. And then I actually did a large installation in which I created a large kind of word problem. How do you solve this problem? What is Blackness? What are the different things you put together to define it? And so I used drawings and created wallpapers and used photography and video and created this answer key. And with these different photographs that you see in the in the installation, I'm actually dressed up as a lawn jockey, but instead I have a bug zapper in my hand, and I'm in different neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And so I thought it was interesting to see the juxtaposition of what happens when you have this kind of iconic stereotypical figure become humanized and a human walking around in different landscapes. What does this look like and read juxtaposition to other folks or in real life? And what happens when that figure has agency? So in thinking about photography and the history of photography, are y'all familiar with the Shirley card? No? So as you can tell, this is probably back in the 60s with the hair, with the cute flip. But initially when you were taking film photos, you had this card called a Shirley card. And she was the basis of how you set your aperture speed based on her skin tone. So they're using a white woman as the norm for aperture speed and how to read different light and take pictures of people. So if you're fair skinned, you know, that works great. But if you're not so much. So you have different artists who were talking about the history of photography and challenging kind of this notion of the Shirley card in different ways. Where we have an example here where the actual composition of the Shirley card is being imitated, but now the word normal is inserted and it's kind of questioned as a result. This brings me to artists like Byron Kim, who's thinking about the complexities of color. Here you have an artist who's looking and thinking about skin tones and really starting to notice the nuances and the different colors that we see represented in skin. So things like the palm of the hand and all the colors that you can see within again, different skin tones that are not based on white skin. Then you move on and you have other artists like Angelica Das with the Humane Project, in which she's working with different folks who volunteer to sit for her and take a portrait with her. And she zooms up on the people up to a 10 by 10 pixel in order to determine the color that you're seeing behind them. And by doing that, she's helping to diversify the different skin tone representations that Pantone paint makes so that you're having more accurate representations based in real life. So going to the pixel, you have artists like Charles Gaines who are taking photography and distilling it and almost getting it back to the old school Doc Matrix early printers from back in the day. So you have this interesting discursive relationship that's happening where you have painting talking with photography and photography, talking back to painting that's developing, that I'm thinking about in looking at these different artists. This artist, as you can see, I love how she's using the pixel in her painting. Pixel is something that you could think of as digital, but now you have a painter who's using the pixel as a form of censorship, playing with how the hijab in the garment obstructs the figure, but also how the pixel can obstruct the figure as well. This brings us to Ruud van Empel. Ruud van Empel is an artist who actually does photography, and his work is composed of actually taking a whole bunch of pictures and then compositing his compositions. So these children you're seeing are not actual real children. They're children that he's created through photography in Photoshop. And it's interesting when I show these images to kids, they're like, is this AI? Which is really interesting when you think about it, because as an artist, he's creating an archive that he's creating data that he's pulling from, and an archive of data which he uses to create images. So how is that not acting like AI? Now painting's getting back into the discussion again. When we're thinking about how Ruud van Empel was articulating the figure, we have artists like Carrie James Marshall, who was thinking about how you're using color to represent dark skin. And so in this Lost Boys series, you see how he's using different tones of black to really play with the skin tone of the figure. So when I started working in some of my pieces, I was working with both photography, doing digital collage, but I'm also started to explore drawing on top of the surface of different images, pushing how there can be a conversation between the photographic image and painting, and thinking about how you can articulate skin tone. And so I was using charcoal and graphite in these particular pieces. When looking at Carrie James Marshall and his idea of better homes and gardens, and this whole series where he's showing different representations of Black life, it really inspired me in thinking about how do I represent different aspects of Black life, but from my true lived experience, which is a suburban experience. I grew up in suburbia. The house you're seeing there is the house that I grew up in. And so part of what I was interested in this series, brick for me isn't necessarily an urban thing, it's what my house was built off of. And so this idea of graffiti and images being put on brick, I was playing with that within this work, and instead of thinking about graffiti in a traditional sense, thinking about how it can work digitally. Can I create this digital kind of graffiti on this brick type of background and tell stories in these different ways in a digital format? So after grad school, actually, I went down to Cane River, New Orleans, and worked on this series called I Am Katrina. It was right after, actually, the hurricane had happened. And I was fortunate enough to stay with a family who had a country home in Cane River, and was able to flee the devastation from the hurricane, but their home in New Orleans was destroyed. But Cane River is a place that has one of the largest Black-owned or Creole-owned plantations. And so I was visiting different sites, from old shacks and torn down gas stations to actually visiting the plantation. And this image is actually taken in front of a slave cabin at the plantation. So now I'm playing with this idea of graffiti, but now it's on a slave cabin in digital form. I'm also using the storm, Katrina, within the work as a third eye within the work. So you have this idea of nature coming in, as well as the bundle of space, kind of this intergalactic element. But here you have representation of the flooding. But you also have other things that were going on at different times, like police brutality. You had the housing crisis. You had the metaphor of the yellow brick road. You had a baby who survived the earthquake in Haiti. So there's a lot of different elements in that work that speaks to kind of what was happening within culture in that time, but also making reference to the past. I'm also engaging with using pixelation within the work, making reference to the digital, but it's almost like the figure now is creating the actual digital image within the picture plane. But I like playing with things like, instead of having like a burning bush like we would in the First Testament, now we have burning sugar cane. So it's almost like this biblical force speaking to the figures within the picture. And then this last piece in the I Am Katrina series called Flag, I'm using the kind of composition of the American flag. And I have Sputnik that is here. And that was at a time when Obama was like, we're in our Sputnik moment. And so I included Sputnik there. But again, you had police brutality. You had the housing crisis. You had birds that were just like crashing into things randomly. And I really loved how I was playing with doubling the image here of female Chinese soldiers. And I thought that was interesting. If you look at one of the sculptures in the Black Art Show, where they have the figure kind of lining up, it's this like almost futuristic or futurism kind of gesture in the work. That's also something that's present if you look at ledger drawings. Indigenous ledger drawings are present. So there's this real kind of interesting way of representing movement, but in this kind of almost kind of flat way that relate to some things that I'm interested in art history, but suggests movement. So with all of this, I'm thinking about what encompasses the art world and how can I contribute to it? And there's a whole other talk I could do about teaching and curating and all that other stuff. I would take a lot of your time if I went into that. But in regards to artwork, one of the big things I was thinking about is their digital hand. And how would you define the digital pictures generation? And how many of you are familiar with the pictures generation in photography? So I see a few hands. So you could think of artists like Cindy Sherman. She's a great example of an artist from the pictures generation, where she was majorly influenced by film and cinema and popular culture and how she was creating the different images she was creating, how she was performing different personas, and how she was creating compositions. So there is an influence from kind of film and video and TV and popular culture that the pictures generations were accessing within photography. Now I'm suggesting, this is where my kind of art history nerd self comes into play, that we're now in a digital pictures generation. So how do digital pictures impact how we create work and influence how we think about and make work? And then how can I, as an artist, push the relationship between photography and painting and portraiture and across different media? I come up with these grand ideas. So looking and thinking about these things, Audre Lorde is a huge influence for me. She is an activist, a poet, a writer. And she wrote this book called Zamnian News, Spelling of My Name. And one of the things that was so powerful to me about the book is that she came up with the term biomythography. And so this literary term she defines as a blending of elements of the autobiography, the novel, personal mythology. And I thought to myself, could biomythography be a framework in which artists engage in interdisciplinary arts practice? And so I thought about that, and I thought about how biomythography relates to intersectionality, this idea of intersecting social identities and describing their overlapping and how they could be related to systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. How do our different identities intersect, and how do we show that within art? And then we have Michelle M. Wright, who is a professor out of Emory University, who wrote this book, The Physics of Blackness. And let's break it down. What she's essentially asking is like, what does it mean to be Black? And if we understand that it's not a biological designation, but it's socially and discursively constructed, does that mean that Blackness changes over time and space? And I'm like, ooh, somebody who's into sci-fi and all of that, the idea of Blackness changing over time and space not only makes sense in an imaginative way, but in a real practical way. Yes, that has most definitely changed for folk. And so she argues that we may define Blackness as a what, but in fact, it always operates as a when and a where. So really interesting ideas that, are blowing my mind. And so how does this relate to Afrofuturism, which is a cultural aesthetic philosophy of science and philosophy of history that explores the developing intersection of the African diaspora culture with technology? And I'm like, yes, I'm falling into this nerd void, which brings me to Octavia Butler. If any of you love science fiction, it is irresponsible of you not to know of Octavia Butler. First of all, she's a California writer. She won the MacArthur Award. She's a genius. She has written so many wonderful books, and most of her protagonists are Black women who are tall with like afros that I relate to at a very personal level. So I love what she has to say here. When I began writing science fiction, I began reading. Heck, I wasn't in any of this stuff I read. I certainly wasn't in science fiction. The only Black people you found were occasional characters or characters who were so feeble-witted that they couldn't manage anything anyway. I wrote myself in. Since I'm me and I'm here and I'm writing, I can write my own stories and I can write myself in. And I'm like, yes, Octavia Butler, I am so here for that way of thinking. And so I actually, before she died, was able to get an autographed book from Octavia Butler, who told me to keep persisting, so I am. And this is where I go into writing and family history. So now you're seeing my mom a little older. And she has contributed to this book, Kinder der Befreiung, which is about Afrodeutscher, or Black Germans who were born during and after World War II. And my mother is such a person. My grandmother is a white German woman, and my grandfather is a Black American soldier. They met in Germany, got married there, had my mom, and came back to the United States. So she tells that story within this particular book, and interesting enough, it was written in German before it was written in English. This made me think about what was happening in Germany before World War II, and we were in the Weimar Republic time. So before they did the pendulum swing of getting much more conservative and going into the Nazi era, you actually had this radical era in Germany in which women were cutting their hair, dresses became shorter. They're actually into the whole androgynous like look. So if you think of like Marlene Dietrich back in the day where she's wearing like tuxedos and whatnot, like Germans were doing the most back then. And this portrait here by Otto Dix became an emblem of the new woman that was seen in that time in Germany. And you had artists like Hannah Hawk, who were engaged in Dada and photomontage and collage and gender play. And so this idea of collage, using these different materials and kind of different representations of women, is interesting to think that that was happening pre-Nazi era Germany. So thinking about that, going back to family history, now you have more information that you can learn from genetic information. So now you have even deeper stories of ancestry that you can look into and identity. And so this idea of the microscopic melanin that I include in my work as a repeating image is something that I include opposed to galactic imagery. So you have the micro and the macro that's scaled within the work. So I collect a lot of different images. I will collect stereographs, which were actually your early form of 3D back in the late 1800s. They had different lessons and different imagery that they'd have. You looked at it through a viewfinder, it became 3D, it blew people's minds back in the day. I also looked at this really interesting archive called Mirror of Race, where they have a bunch of older photographs from the late 18 and early 1900s. And as you can see, the hair that's in the frame of this image is really interesting. That's not a way that you would typically see hair within a picture, but that was something that I was really inspired by, that made me think about hair and how that could be included within the work. But you have different representations within cabinet cards of different folks who were looking into representing themselves pictorially for the first time with the invention of the camera. So with the cabinet card series, what I did is I took cabinet cards that I was collecting in old Ebony and Jet magazines that I was collecting and started to collage the different mediums together and started putting hair, my own hair actually, into the work. So I started collecting my hair from my brushes and my combs. And I show these images together because I almost feel like she looks very similar to sharing features of my mother within this piece. And so I was using different additive and subtractive processes. I was drawing on top of it with graphite, scratching away at the surface with X-Actos, etching into it, and playing with different ways. I could play with eyeline scale and thinking about how they could be installed. So as little families or little clusters, thinking about the matting and playing with corner installation and then installing in big kind of clusters. So at this time, I'm also working on larger work. And this is when I was in residency at University of Laverne. And I was looking at different images. This is an image of Sarah Bartman. She was also referred to as the Venus Hottentotten. And she was actually taken to World's Fairs, and her body was put on display after she passed away. This is actually an image of her body being put on display. And so I wanted to give humanity back to her image and incorporate her with a multitude of representations of Black women across the diaspora. And so within the Belle Jet series, I'm collaging and incorporating different imagery of women from Jet magazine who happen to be the beauty of the week, And the beauty of the week generally was like a beautiful black woman in a bathing suit with a little bit of information. You know what I'm talking about. If you know, you know. And so if you're seeing a lot of ladies in bikinis, you're seeing those jet beauties of the week. But I'm incorporating different things. So some of you might recognize this. This is a Sandy helmet mask. You actually have some in the Crocker collection. These are what are worn girls wear in ceremonies when they're coming of age and becoming women of their community or their tribe, and it's part of the ceremony. So it's not worn over the face, it's on top of the head. So there's like little cues that I'm making in regards to womanhood, coming of age, and beauty that I'm really playing with across the diaspora. But then I'm also including different family members and even myself in some of the images. And I'm using pastels and pastel pencils, powdered pigment, paint, and I'm drawing on top of the surface of these. And so you'll see areas in where I'm including different elements from stereographs to family portraits. And again, you start to see some of the women in the bathing suits where I'm incorporated in the work as well. So, taking you pre-pandemic. So back in 2019, I had this show, did this talk, did all the programming and everything, and I exhibited the bell jet work, and I exhibited the cabinet cards work, and it was like the first time I had this solo show with all this work in one space. And then I also made a video where I was looking at Zora Neale Hurston. If some of you came to my film series screening last year, I screened Field Works, which was Zora Neale Hurston's film that she made back in 1928, documenting rural life in this deep South of Black folks. And this was revolutionary at the time. She was one of the first ethnographers of African American life and created some of the first content of video works of African Americans. That wasn't like for entertainment. So I made a video in which I was engaging in many of the same gestures and postures and movements that were present within the video. And I have a Urkel poster where you're seeing me move through my studio space, and that is actually in my space. And I want y'all to take note that Urkel is ripping through the poster. And then the pandemic hit. So that show got locked up. The schools are closed, galleries are closed, museums are closed, and everything kind of shifted to online. And from this point, I started working on a series called the Masking Series. And this is at a time when we all were starting to wear masks. And so I was thinking about, what does it mean to wear a mask? Are we changed by wearing a mask? Are we changing how we perceive others when we wear a mask? Within the tradition of African masquerade, it's a multimedia performance, it's a spiritual performance, actually wearing a mask. So I'm thinking about these ideas. And then I'm thinking about using the mask as a space for moving and still images for storytelling. So this is where I started developing work in which I was creating different video collages within head wraps and with masks that I was wearing, pulling clips from the news and the internet that were reflecting kind of the current cultural milieu we're in, but also thinking about the personal as a site of shared and individual memory. So here are some stills from that video. I don't know if I can get this to play, but I made that video and I asked my neighbor if I could project it on the side of his house. Oh. And what ended up happening is I projected it on the side of his house. And my neighbor was like kind of like the mayor of the neighborhood. He would be like outside with a glass of wine, giving dog treats to people who were walking the dog, playing music. So What's Going On ended up playing just serendipitously by Marvin Gaye while the video was going. So I had that going, recorded it, and then posted it onto Facebook. So this is my Facebook post of me documenting doing what I would call my first public art project, where I literally went across the street. So that when I talked about being local, I'm like, no, I was super hyper local there. And from just posting that on social media, I was contacted by NE Sculpture Gallery Factory for the social justice billboard project. You notice that there's these billboards that are here. This is actually the site in which George Floyd was murdered. So they created a site, they looked at the billboards that were at that corner and thought about different art that could be put into that place that could be healing for the community. And so it was a huge honor to be invited to do that project. And like everyone else, you're at home thinking, what is going on in the world right now? You know, this is horrible, and it was traumatizing. But thinking about billboards, if y'all are familiar with The Great Gatsby, one of the things I was thinking about was the spectacle billboard that was in The Great Gatsby. Within this book, this billboard operated as kind of a informal narrator that observed the characters moving through the story and was kind of like a conscience to a certain extent. So when I made the billboard, I wanted to be able to kind of bear witness and be an ever-present force there that's like, I'm seeing what y'all are doing. I have an eye on you, and we're watching. And this piece is called Testament. And so here you see it installed in the space there, and it becomes really impactful in terms of the scale. And then also the idea of we're still masking during that time, and the mask still serving to tell a story within the image as well. So now we are fully in the pandemic, and from the Social Justice Billboard Project, I did a statewide project with California for All, the state of California, and the Center for Sierra Health Foundation on a COVID-19 awareness campaign. And so, you know, I'm on TV now, but I'm on the inside. This was super, it's like, talk about an introvert's kind of nightmare. But it was really interesting because it was this large campaign that I worked on. And so I was doing print ads and did a billboard here in Oak Park. So if any of y'all were driving around in Oak Park during COVID, you're seeing this billboard, which was of my husband wearing a mask and his story being told in the mask. And for me, it was really important to have an image of my husband because we were being bombarded with images of Black death and murder. And so I needed there to be an affirmation to Black life and to be a large image of affirmation to Black life. And a man with fly jewelry looking cute. Out there in the community. So that was one reason why I thought it was really important to have that this image was powerful and that this just by itself was very clear. But within the mask, you actually have imagery of him getting vaccinated and people masking and doing stuff. And then also billboards in Southern California. So because it was a statewide project, we had billboards up and down the state in different markets. And then I got to make a commercial and do a PSA. So here's me working on the commercial. Here's some stills from the commercial. And then I also ended up doing an installation in Arden Fair Mall where I had a video work with masking happening there as well. And I worked even more with some of the, a longer film with that. During this time, I was also working with my husband, who's also an artist, and we worked on another video project, actually, in which that idea of field notes we started to carry through. And this is with the California Natural Resource Agency here in Sacramento. So if y'all ever want to see more of my art, you could go down there and check it out. But we were using the California seal as a space for storytelling because the seal tells so much. But then replacing Manivria with a character that I was playing, Califia, the namesake of California, and having her move throughout the imagery. We also went to different sites, one of them at the time, now Black Miners Bar, but at the time Negro Bar, and we're like, what is this place? So we nerded out doing research on Negro Bar and learning the history of blacks and gold mining in the California Gold Rush. And so within the video, we tell a little bit of that story. And just for you to see scale, I think it's about 35 feet. So it's you see the person here? So it's a pretty large work. From there, I was able to take my Bell Jet and Cabinet Card exhibition online and did an online exhibition with Loyola Marymount University. So there's some more video content, some essays that were written about the work. And from there, LACMA invited me to come out and speak about Bell Jet and Cabinet Cards. You see where this is going? We're getting to more about the cabinet cards because LACMA had an exhibition that they had up called Acting Out, Cabinet Cards and the Making of Modern Photography. And I'm like, oh, you're stealing my nerd heart with your content right now. And I always have this image of the catalog that they gave me with the drawing pad because the aesthetics and the conversation between drawing and photography is happening here, even within the graphic design in real time. And I'm like, I love this. So I went and visited the exhibition and nerded out, and I was thinking about different ideas of synthesthesia and started incorporating that within the work in terms of articulating time, but then started getting really dimensional with it. So I started not only ripping into the pictures and the collages, but now kind of creating these like jeweled rips within the work. In the collages. Next, from there, during the pandemic, you had this big blow up into NFTs. I don't know if y'all remember that, and I'm sure like many of you, I was like, dude, what's an NFT? Like, why? What is it? What are you doing? What for? Why come? And so part of what made sense for me as an NFT was thinking about cabinet cards were meant to be traded. They were small. They were collected. You gave them to people. And I'm like, well, what if I take the collages, animate them, digitize them, and turn them to NFTs? And so I took a set of collages and actually animated them. And unfortunately, you're not seeing the animation in this. But I animated them and turned them into NFTs, and then turned them into infinite objects, so then they were turned back into an object. So I went through a complete phase of creating a collage, then scanning the collage and creating a digital version of it to animate it, to then turn it into an NFT, then went and turned that NFT back into an object. And I had LACMA keep all of that work throughout the process and have it accessioned into their collection. So they have the original collages, they have the NFTs, and they have the infinite objects, and they even have the little digital files of it. So they have every permutation of the work, and it was something that was really exciting for me because LACMA was one of the first museums to acquire a NFT collection. So I'm really happy to have my work a part of that, but then be very gangster about the provenance of the work. So looking at the exhibition, they had like an old Victorian wedding dress, and I'm like, yes, because my wedding dress was an All Saints parachute wedding dress, so it wasn't a typical, Victorian white one. It was a gray one, a darker one, and I love that idea of the wedding dress being on display in the exhibition, and showing the woman wearing the wedding dress in a cabinet card. I collect cabinet cards and I build these archives that I pull from. And I loved how he defined that it's a cabinet portrait. And this print that you're seeing here is actually my fingerprint, where I was like, oops, I picked it up and sullied it. And so I'm like, this is an important part of the work now. I'm keeping this digitally. It's like I'm literally talking about the hand in the work, and my hand was like literally all up in the work. I was also looking at like different things from the catalog where they had sunglasses and moons and doing kooky stuff, and I'm like, okay, rips. So remember I was telling you how Urkel was ripping through? You see these ladies ripping through, so these rips that are coming through the cards are actually something that were originally done with the cabinet cards, which is interesting in and of itself, and the texture and the quality. Some pictures are more reflective, some are more matte. And then looking at how the different old photo albums that they had, that they put older photographs in, were actually like taking painterly techniques. So now you have like these old photos that look like, it could look like it's from the 60s of, crown molding or wood paneling that you would have. So this faux kind of wood that's brush strokes that goes back to the conversation of drawing. You also had kind of sets that were developed in the exhibition where people came and sat, and this is part of my studio space. So I was like, maybe I can set up a set in my studio space that seems to already have a set. So here's my studio space, and you see the wedding dress in there, which is the attic upstairs in her studio. And I include melanin repeated in this work, and I started working on this series and included using pastels, powdered pigment, graphite, charcoal, and created a series of works called the Cabinet Portrait series. And during this time, while I was making this work, I actually had a hysterectomy. So the first piece, Jessica on Bed Rest, is actually referencing Olympia. And so here you have Olympia on the bed. I took out the black maid and used the sculpture that I had here in my home as a surrogate to hold flowers that my mom and sister had sent me from my surgery. I love getting into art history and still life. Decaying flowers are a really awesome attribute in still life and art historical things. And also thinking about the idea of like having my womb taken out and having decaying flowers, really nice like connections. But then they're also really given to me by women in my family. So there's a lot going on there. So it's loaded. And so then you have me on bed rest at home, and like literally wearing like the compression panties you gotta wear after surgery. I was really out there doing the most. And you could see I have kind of space, like a void for now the place where my uterus used to be. You've got melanin floating around in there and the polka dots of my bra. But you're starting to see how I'm using pastels and different mediums on the surface of it so that it looks actually really kind of painterly in different areas and can go between looking like a drawing and looking like a photograph. Next work, I actually have this up now where I'm making reference to my father. I'm thinking about Carly Fernandez, where she dresses like her father. And again, we're thinking about that Vermeer period where we're playing with gender and how women are representing themselves. So then you also have artists like Anna Manetta, who is using like hair on her face to play with gender and using men's hair on her face to play with gender. So in my portrait, and then here's my my parents again, Shaft. But this is a corporate portrait of my father. So I spoke to someone today who was wearing some pretty dope octagon glasses, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I love your glasses. I totally have a thing for octagon glasses because of this corporate picture of my dad. I always thought his mutton chops and glasses were dope. And so I went and did a picture in which I dressed up as my dad, and for the beard, I used my hair. And I look more like my father than my brothers do, which was pretty amazing. So I'm really tickled by this piece. The next, and this is part actually of the LACMA's collection as well, is Wife Portrait. And this is where I use the backdrop of my studio, and I put on my wedding dress. And I was thinking about how the backdrop, the kind of sepia tone is actually very close to my own skin tone within the picture. This is something that I would notice I'd see in some older photographs where I loved how the brown of the Army uniform is the same brown within the person's skin. So I was thinking about how the background and foreground and skin tone is read in photography. And so I put on my wedding dress, and mind you, this is after I had my hysterectomy, so it's kind of stupid, right? At the most bloated time of my life, I got back into my wedding dress like 12 years later. And I'm wearing not even wedding jewelry, just jewelry my husband gave me, so he gives me diesel jewelry. And posed for this picture in my wedding dress and thought of it as portrait of a wife. I actually don't have like a traditional like bridal portrait. So I thought this was an interesting way to speak to being in the next phase of my life, where, you know, you're only a bride once, but if you're a wife, like long term, that's actually where the real long-term commitment and portraiture and things are happening. And so I felt that was a really interesting way to deal with portraiture and think about myself, especially like while I'm processing the fact that I have a hysterectomy. And I'm playing with matte and reflective with the surface of this work. So again, I was looking at the work and I'm like, hey, some things are more matte than others. So I'm going in with graphite and pastel and powdered pigment and amping up some of the reflectiveness in areas of it and playing with kind of color and texture. So then it also becomes a very kind of painterly mixed media work. And so now the other work from this series, I'm looking at, again, The New Woman. And I collect work, like I'll collect different images, and I purchased a set of slides from the 70s of Black women and found my doppelganger, which was amazing. So I don't know who she is, like never met her in my life, just found her. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This is amazing. And that's one of the great things about collecting a lot of different materials. You will find yourself through different times reflected in different ways. So of course, you know, she's adopted, she's in the fam. And I was thinking about, okay, and what was going on the table? And I was thinking about my table, so I'm actually making collage, and there's my X-Acto, and there's hot chocolate. And I'm wearing my wedding ring, because the hand was very prominent in Otto Dick's work, and so I wanted to make sure that my hand was prominent. So you have my wedding ring, but then you also have my tattoo, which in Latin says opifex, which means artisan. So I'm like, I like the idea of being like an artist, making a self-portrait, referencing that they're an artist, very meta. I'm also working on the surface with these as well. So I'm using pastels and charcoal and pigment, including moon imagery, just because I can. And here you could see in my studio the piece. But then I started ripping into these larger pieces like I do with the smaller cabinet cards. So this was my first like, am I gonna do it or not? You know, because this is expensive. And I'm really happy with how that turned out. Sunglasses, I just have sunglasses like this. So I'm like, this lady is cool. Another way that you can see yourself reflected in others from an image from the exhibition. And so I started out with this image, and then I started working on the surface with it, and I actually included hair in the work. So now we're getting to the true story of Edges. And y'all, this is me with my fro, green screens. So yes, the first time I did this, I did use green screen paint in my hair to make the video. And what was interesting about the true story of Edges, it was actually first at Coordinates, and Faith McKinney had invited me to participate. And I was still on bed rest, and Coordinates required you to drastically transform a room or a part of a building with your art. And I'm like, how do you do that when you're on bed rest? And so I made a video where I was sitting in a chair. And so that work was literally dealing with the challenge of, I'm on bed rest, I cannot, my movement, my range of motion is super limited, and I have to do a transformative installation in this space. But I also want to experiment with this idea of storytelling in the hair, like in the way I was experimenting with storytelling in the mask and with head wraps. So that's how the true story of Edges came into being. It was a challenge that I clearly figured out how to work around. I also made a work dealing with the hysterectomy as well, another video work in which I have an overlay of a surveillance camera because within a few months, like Roe v. Wade was reversed. And it was weird. It was like Roe v. Wade was reversed. There's a tampon shortage and there's a baby formula shortage all at the same time. And I was just like, really? The only way I am not implicated is because I do not have a uterus. Like, ridiculous, right? I know you ladies know. And so I had different imagery and storytelling that I told inside the space of the uterus at the video there. And then I continued doing collaborations with my husband. And so we participated in the Mexicali Biennial and produced a video called The Unauthorized History of California, Volume 2. And it's actually part of the Library of Congress. And we incorporated different imagery dealing with the gold rush, the agricultural rush, the real estate rush, and redlining history within California. At that point, now I started this, somebody asked me, do you teach? And I'm like, well, I'm the artist in residence at Twin Rivers School District. And people are like, what's that? And I'm like, well, at MLK Tech Academy, they converted classroom space into gallery space and invited me to have an exhibition in that space. So guess what? I have works from the Bell Jet and Cabinet Card series. And some new works that I made that are within the exhibition. And I have tours of 7th graders from the district, and I work with docents where we talk about issues in the exhibition or in the work, and we work on visual literacy and having conversation in the galleries with the kids. And I've been doing that this is my 3rd year. So I'm really excited about the program. It is a new program. We're hoping to be able to present this to a nationwide conference as a model that can be used and replicated in different spaces. And I mentioned that, I used the Bell Jet and Cabinet card exhibition because of COVID and things being shut down, I was actually able to distill this exhibition for different formats and for different communities. And so it's been a really great experience to have that opportunity to do that and be able to present it in this way. So this is up there now. And I created another video for their site, True Story of Edges, Chapter 2. And that brings us to now, or not now, almost now. Then I worked with the Creative Corps, which was one of the coolest experiences I ever had. It's very close to a WPA project. And I did a mural project with Colonial Park, where I worked with the community, where they designed murals and I painted with them. I painted with hot cops. It was kind of, I didn't know that was a thing, but it was. And I worked with seniors at the Senior Center and the Sacramento Room, archiving their writing and poetry. And some of them actually sing too. And working with the Railroad Museum. So another video project, but I want to end it. Another project in which I was at Mississippi State University. So thinking about how I can now do projection mapping in different areas. But this actually, the first image we started off with the talk, is a still from a work that has just recently been put up in LA for the K Line, of part of LA Metro's Art in Public Places. And it's at Leimert Park. The series is called, it's part of a show called Love Leimert. And the video is called The True Stories of Edges, Leimert Park. So that is my latest public art piece that I have done. I know I went on a long while. There's a lot to show you. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Jessica. It's always great to have the artist and then explain so many things of what goes on in your mind. It's incredible. Thank you. We're going to have a time for a couple questions. Scott has the microphone.
I've got a mic, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll make my way towards you.
And then if we didn't get to your question, please then pop over to the reception and then ask Jessica, and I'm sure she will tell you exactly what you'd like to know. Go ahead. Scott?
Any questions, anyone? Oh, here we go.
How do you catalog or explain yourself in the type of art? You do so many different things, and your mind is so developed in what you do that it's hard to understand, I think, at some point. How would you describe yourself in your art if you just walked in a room and you didn't show all your pictures?
Like an interdisciplinary artist, multimedia artist.
Yeah, I just describe myself as an interdisciplinary artist. Yeah, because I do the most, right? Yeah. I'm just like, I need an umbrella term. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, interdisciplinary. Or for the kids, when I literally do my presentation, I'm like, mixed media. You don't have to just do one.
Another one here.
When you said you work at the Martin Luther King School, where is that located? Is that part of Twin Rivers?
Yeah, so that's MLK Tech Academy as part of the Twin Rivers School District. And
okay.
I'm a resident with the school district, but the gallery, the site of it is at MLK Tech Academy. The galleries are called Still I Rise Galleries.
Oh, okay, because we have a MLK Elementary that's in the Pocket area, so that's a different one. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is junior high.
Oh, it's a junior high.
They're the 6'7" guys.
Oh, okay. so that's different. But that's marvelous that you're doing that for Twin Rivers. They really need all the help they can get there.
I love 7th graders like that. They're so quirky, and I'm like right there with them.
That's wonderful. I used to work at a library in that neighborhood. They need all the help they can get. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I think on that, we'll say thank you very much
Thanks,
to
y'all.
Jessica. Really enjoyed it, and please join us just across the hall.